European bison has moved a step back from the brink of extinction. The largest land mammal was almost wiped out by hunting and deforestation. Its recovery is now being regarded as a conservation success story. Take a look.
Europe released bison into a dying forest. 1 year later, no one could believe what happened at Bison, a silent forest and a bold decision. In the quiet mountains of southern Romania, something extraordinary was happening. For years, the forest that had been dying, once filled with life, the trees now stood like skeletons. The land had been stripped bare by logging, farming, and hunting. Meadows dried up, animals vanished, and the rich green wilderness turned into a lonely, lifeless desert. People called it a wilderness desert, a place that looked wild, but no longer worked like a real ecosystem. Then, in 2014, a group of conservationists made a daring move. They released a herd of European bison into this damaged land. These animals had not walked there in over 100 years. Many people thought it wouldn't work. The bison were huge and needed a lot of space. The forest was broken. Even some scientists believed it would fail. But something happened just 1 year later that shocked everyone. The forest began to come alive again. This was not just about saving animals anymore. It became a powerful story of how nature could heal itself if given the chance. Paragraph 2. The fall of Europe's largest land animal, the European bison, also called the wisent, was once a mighty symbol of Europe's wild heart. Long ago, these giant animals roamed freely from the forests of France to the mountains of the Caucasus. They played an important role in keeping nature in balance. As they moved and grazed, they opened up paths through the forest, helped spread seeds, and fed the soil with their waste. But slowly, over hundreds of years, they began to disappear. As people cut down forests to build farms and towns, the bison lost their homes. By the Middle Ages, they were pushed into small patches of land. Then came guns. Hunting became easier, and bison were killed for meat, fur, and trophies. The worst time came during World War I, when German troops killed nearly every bison left in Poland's famous Biodiversity forests. By 1927, the last wild European bison was gone. Only 54 were left, all in zoos or private parks. It looked like the end. But even in that dark time, a small group of people began to hope. They wondered, could these few survivors bring back a piece of the lost wild? Paragraph 3. Rebuilding from almost nothing after the bison disappeared from the wild. Scientists moved quickly to save the few that were left. Only 12 of the 54 had strong enough genes to help rebuild the population. These bison were kept in zoos across Europe, starting in the 1930s. Scientists in Poland, Germany, and Russia worked together on careful breeding programs. They kept detailed records of every birth, tracked each animal's health, and avoided inbreeding. Every baby bison was important. In 1932, they created a special group, the International Society for the Protection of the European Bison. Even during World War II, when many parts of Europe were in chaos, this mission continued. By the 1960s, the captive population of bison was growing. They were kept in large forest parks and enclosures, but always behind fences. Over time, scientists realized that the bison were more than just animals to be protected. They were key to restoring nature. Without bison, many forests had become too dense. Wildflowers and insects disappeared. The balance of nature was lost. People began to dream bigger. What if, instead of keeping bison in cages, they could return to the wild and help fix the damage? Paragraph 4. Romania takes the risk among all the countries in Europe. Romania took the biggest step. They looked at the Tarcu Mountains, a wild and rugged area in the southern Carpathians. This place had once been full of life, but years of overgrazing, illegal logging, and the collapse of local farming had left it empty. The land was out of balance. Villagers called it the dying forest. Rewilding Europe, a non-profit group, partnered with WWF Romania to do something never done before at such a large scale. They planned to bring wild bison back, not just to survive, but to restore the land. But it was not easy. The mountains were hard to reach, with few roads and no fences. The local people hadn't lived with wild bison in generations. Some feared the animals might destroy crops or hurt people. Others worried they would compete with livestock. Even scientists were nervous. Would the bison adapt? Would they roam too far and get lost or killed? Could the land support them? And what if it all failed? The pressure was high. The team had to be sure everything was done right. This wasn't just about saving animals. It was about saving a broken landscape. Paragraph 5. The plan comes to life. Bringing bison back to the wild meant careful planning. The team had to find healthy bison with the best genetics. Animals were selected from breeding centers in Sweden, Germany, Italy, and Poland. Some traveled for days by truck. Each one was checked by a vet to make sure they were strong and healthy. Moving such large animals, some weighing over 1,700 pounds, was a huge challenge. Once they arrived in Romania, they were not released right away. First, they were placed in soft-release enclosures, big fenced areas where they could slowly get used to their new home. They had to learn the local food, feel the weather, and adjust to the terrain. Each bison was fitted with a GPS collar, so scientists could track their movements. This way, they would know if the animals were safe, where they were feeding, and if they stayed together as a herd. After weeks of monitoring, the fences were open. The bison were free. What happened next was more powerful than anyone imagined. The land began to breathe again. Birds returned. Flowers bloomed. The forest, once silent, started to come alive. Paragraph 6. 1 year later, a forest reborn. Just 1 year after the bison were released. The changes were clear. In places where the ground had been dry and lifeless, new plants began to grow. The bison's grazing cleared thick brush, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor. Their dung helped fertilize the soil. Insects, once gone, came back. Birds followed. Small mammals returned. The bison opened up new paths in the forest, creating space for wildflowers to bloom again. Scientists called them ecosystem engineers, animals that changed the land around them for the better. Villagers who were once unsure began to see the difference. Some even helped by guiding tourists and watching the herds. The bison were not just surviving. They were helping to heal the land. What had once been called a dying forest now showed signs of life. The experiment had turned into a success story. Romania's bison reintroduction became a model for other countries. People from across Europe came to see what was possible. When humans and nature worked together, the return of the bison was not just a win for conservation. It was a symbol of hope, proof that even the most damaged places can come back to life. Paragraph 7. A new beginning for nature in use today. The European bison continues to thrive in the Romanian mountains. The herd has grown, and the land continues to heal. But the story is not over. More work is needed to protect these animals, keep their bloodlines healthy, and help other parts of Europe follow the same path. Rewilding is not just about animals. It's about restoring balance, bringing back the missing pieces of nature. It also teaches us something important, that humans can undo some of the damage we've caused. The return of the bison shows that even when hope seems lost, recovery is possible. What was once thought impossible, releasing bison into a broken forest, has become one of Europe's greatest conservation stories. For the people living near these forests, the bison have become more than just animals. They are a living reminder of the past and a promise for the future and for the rest of the world. Their story is proof that nature, when given the chance, will always try to find its way back, one step at a time, one hoof print at a time. Europe released bison into a dying forest. 1 year later, no one could believe what happened. The return of the wild. Johnson 2014. Something amazing happened deep in the forest of Romania. 17 European bison, huge, ancient animals once hunted to near extinction, were released into the Carpathian Mountains. These bison had not walked freely in this area for over 100 years. The forest they entered was not full of life, but instead was quiet and nearly dead. Over time, roads, farming, and human activity had damaged the land. The ecosystem had lost its balance, and many plants and animals had disappeared. The release of the bison was not just a science project, it was a bold dream. It was a chance to see if nature could recover if we gave it help. Many people were excited, but just as many were doubtful. Could a few animals really change a dying forest? Would they survive? Could this actually work? The world watched carefully. Nobody knew what to expect, planning for a wild future before the first bison ever touched the forest floor. Months of planning took place. Scientists, conservationists, and local leaders worked together. Field rangers trained in animal care watched closely for signs of stress, hunger, or illness. They tracked the bison's behavior and prepared to help if needed. But it wasn't just about the animals. It was also about the people. Villagers who lived nearby were brought into the plan. They were offered jobs as wildlife rangers, tour guides, and bison monitors. Children were taught about the project in schools, and community meetings were held to share knowledge and calm fears. Over time, locals began to see the bison not as a threat, but as something to be proud of. Some even dreamed of tourism that would bring more jobs and visitors to their quiet villages. The project was about connection between people, animals, and the land. The first steps and first struggles when the bison were finally released, it was a powerful moment. These animals had been gone for centuries. Now, they were walking free once again. But the early days were not easy. Some of the bison had trouble adjusting. They were stressed from travel and confused by the unfamiliar terrain. A few even died, raising fears that the land was no longer fit for wild animals. The Carpathian Mountains are rugged, with broken paths, old roads, and strange weather. They are beautiful, but not always gentle. The bison also had to find new food sources and learn how to live without human help. On top of that, their tracking collars sometimes failed, which made it harder for rangers to find or protect them. As problems grew, funding became uncertain, and people began asking hard questions. Was this project too risky? Could it really work in the real world? The rise of doubt, and for a while the scientists worked to solve the technical problems. A different kind of challenge grew in nearby towns. Some villagers started to worry. They heard stories, some true, some not, about bison wandering near homes, damaging fences, or scaring livestock. Rumors spread quickly, and some people began to fear the animals. They wondered if the project would cause more harm than good. Meanwhile, the media, which had once praised the project, became quieter. Without good news to report, many stopped paying attention. Behind the scenes, the pressure was growing. Conservation groups struggled to keep the project going. Some donors pulled back, worried that the dream was fading. Yet, through all this, the bison kept moving. They explored the land. They formed groups. And slowly, signs of hope began to appear, just not in the way anyone had expected. A calf changes everything. Late in 2015, a ranger spotted something unbelievable. A pregnant female bison was walking with the herd. No one expected this. Scientists had feared the bison might not reproduce in the wild. After all, these animals had been raised in breeding centers for generations. Could they still survive, give birth, and raise young without help? The answer came 1 year after the first release. A wild calf was born in the Carpathians, the first in over 100 years. It was more than a birth, it was a symbol of survival, of resilience, of wildness returning. Even the harshest critics had to pause. This was no longer just an experiment. Nature had taken the next step on its own. The news spread, and suddenly interest returned. The wild calf became a sign that the project might succeed after all. A herd begins to thrive from 2016 onward. The bison project entered a new phase. Each year, a few more bison were released, carefully selected for their strong genes to help build a healthy population. But what surprised everyone was how the original herd had adapted. They began moving across the land like wild animals, not just surviving but truly living. GPS tracking showed that they followed natural paths, grazed in new areas, and formed family groups. Mating behavior began to show. Calves were born and survived. The bison were no longer clinging to the release zones. They were building their own rhythms with the land. For the first time in decades, scientists began to say something they hadn't dared before. This is working. The herd was stable, healthy, and growing. People from around the world began to notice and believe. The forest comes to live within. Something even bigger happened. The forest began to change. It wasn't just the bison who were returning, it was everything. The bison, by their very nature, shape the land. When they walk, graze, and wallow, they break up the soil. When they eat, they spread seeds. Even their waste brings nutrients back into the earth. Soon, wildflowers returned. Grasslands began to grow. Birds came back to nest in the open meadows. Insects buzzed, and small mammals returned. And where there was prey, predators followed. Wolves and lynx were spotted in greater numbers. Scientists were amazed. Even the soil had improved, richer in carbon, better at holding water. Areas once called dead zones now pulsed with life. The speed of this change stunned everyone. The forest wasn't just surviving, it was healing, and it all began with those 17 bison. From fear to pretty, as the landscape changed, so did the people. The same villagers who once feared the bison now welcomed them. They began giving tours to visitors, taking photos of wild calves, and sharing stories about the changes they saw. Children grew up knowing that bison were part of their home. Flowers bloomed where there had been only dust. The sound of bird song returned. For many, it felt like living in a storybook. But this wasn't fiction, it was real. What had once been a risky gamble was now seen as one of the most successful. conservation projects in Europe. More than just a victory for animals, it was a victory for hope. And it was a reminder that sometimes when we stop controlling nature and start listening to it, amazing things can happen. A new Wild Europe 2022. The Southern Carpathians Bison Project had become a global example. A study found that the herd was now genetically strong, with lower inbreeding and higher diversity. In other words, the bison were not just surviving, they were creating a future. In 2023, the project shifted focus. Instead of just adding more animals, they began connecting lands. National parks across Romania agreed to open shared spaces, forming one of Europe's largest protected wild zones. The bison started exploring beyond their original territory. Camera traps even caught them in a neighboring national park, proof that they were linking disconnected wild areas, helping the land become whole again. What began as a local project was now part of a bigger dream, restoring wild nature to all of Europe. The climate surprised, but perhaps the most surprising benefit came from something few had expected. In 2024, researchers discovered that the bison were helping fight climate change. Just 170 bison, living in 48 square kilometers, were capturing over 54,000 tons of carbon dioxide each year, the same as removing 43,000 cars from the road. By grazing, fertilizing the land, and supporting plant growth, the bison were turning damaged land into carbon storage. The wild wasn't just beautiful, it was powerful. It was cleaning the air, improving the soil, and bringing stability to the climate. These massive animals, once nearly lost, had become unlikely climate heroes. The forest wasn't just recovering, it was giving back. A miracle in the mountains. By the end of 2024, over 210 bison roamed freely in the Southern Carpathians. More than half were born in the wild. The ecosystem was thriving. Flowers, animals, and people all felt the change. What began as a daring idea had become a true miracle. The wild had returned not just in numbers, but in spirit. The bison had brought the forest back to life. Villages had found new pride, and across the world, people had found proof that healing was possible. If 17 bison could revive a dying forest, what else could we bring back? The story of the bison is not just about nature. It's about second chances for animals, for forests, and for us.